Hi, it's Alistair McIntyre at Electric Scotland. I got a message in asking me if I could do a video about UKIP. I will say that I don't know a lot about UKIP, but I can give it a go to try and explain possibly how they came to be and whatnot. I think you have to bear in mind that a lot of British people have been unhappy with the EU for many years. And UKIP was really started on the basis that they wanted out of the EU and wanted an independent Britain to be able to go out here in the world and deal with it on a local terms, basically. Nigel Farage was obviously the leader of UKIP. He was very vocal about it. And he became very popular, I have to say, because he ramped up a lot of feelings for people that felt Britain was getting a bad deal from the EU and were becoming a rule taker rather than a rule leader, basically. The Bruges group, if you Google Bruges, you'll find them, but they were a group that said that Britain would do far better outside of the EU rather than in it. And they've been putting a case for some years now about why Britain would do a lot better outside of the EU. I think Nigel Farage agreed with pretty well all that, and he was saying that there needed to be someone to stand up to the government of the day to say, we want out of the EU, please. And because of all the work he did, UKIP got more and more popular. And of course that started to affect elections and so forth. You've got to slightly bear in mind that whereas the UKIP basically is a conservative organisation, but wanting out of the EU, they have a natural tendency to work with the Conservative Party rather than any other party as such. But the thing is, when you come to an election, that splits the votes, which is where a problem comes in. So for example, if there was a tight race between Labour and Conservative and UKIP managed to split the vote, it could mean in fact that Labour then get the majority vote. But if you took UKIP and the Conservatives together, they would have won the vote. So that's one of the problems about voting for UKIP. But nevertheless, at its height, now with Nigel Farage, he got a lot of support. And I think it was basically people were saying, hey, we should be out of the EU. And of course, when Cameron, our then Prime Minister, decided that he would have a referendum on the EU, he obviously went round all the EU people and said, hey, we need a little bit of help here, if we're going to stay in the EU. But frankly, the EU parties, Germany, France, people like that, they kind of poo-pooed it, maybe gave a small concession here and there, but they thought, Britain's never going to leave, So they didn't take us seriously, essentially. And of course, we all know the result of that we voted to leave the EU. So I think I would say that UKIP is a useful device right now to warn the current Prime Minister that if she gives in, like she's given in with the Chequers deal, that she's going to pay a price at the polls for that. And that's why UKIP's got a bit of a resurgence lately, because it's clear that Theresa May is a traitor to Britain. And I'm sorry, but she's a genuine traitor to this country. She has no faith in the country at all and wants to be a rule taker. She should do the honourable thing and resign and get out of it, because she's clearly a Remainer and she fought for Remain in the referendum campaign. And that's what astonishes me, considering that we voted to leave. I mean, like Hammond, our finance minister, he was a Remainer, and he's still a Remainer, and he's doing everything he can to undermine us leaving the EU. So there's a lot of bias going on there, and there's a lot of rubbish being spoken. I mean, some of the fear-mongering going on right now is just ridiculous. In fact, if you remember when we had the referendum, Barack Obama said, bad deal, and if you leave, well, you'll be at the back of the queue. And virtually the IMF said the same thing, the Bank of England said the same thing. The Treasury gave diabolical forecasts of what would happen to Britain if we left the EU. Now, anyone with a little bit of honesty about them would say, since we voted to leave the EU, Britain has actually performed better than it has done for many, many years. I mean, we've got the highest level of employment, the lowest level of unemployment. Investment into the UK has been at the highest level for ages. We're actually doing much more business outside the EU than we used to do. Our trade debt is lower than it's almost ever been. I mean, everything you look at tells us that since we voted to leave the EU, Britain has done much, much better. And people like Sir James Dyson, he's a real innovator. He's a billionaire. He's very successful. Everything he's done has been successful, but he's done it because, the EU is actually biased against him. But despite that, he's been extremely successful. And he keeps saying, we can leave in a no deal, we'll do great, we won't have any problems with that at all. But the doom mongers and the scared little-minded people that don't think Britain's got what it takes. I mean, you need to look at, to understand Britain's role in the world, I think most people haven't a clue about Britain in the world. I mean, 90% of all future growth in trade is going to come from outside of Europe. I mean, that's just a fact. So why we should be kowtowing to the EU, which is a declining part of the world, I just don't understand it, I have to say. And that's where UKIP come in, because at least UKIP is being honest and saying we want out of the EU, out of the single market, out of the common market, out of control of the ECJ. That's the... so I think a lot of people in Britain, in fact most in Britain, want out of the EU. They want to take back control. And we want to say to our parliamentary people, our members of parliament, look, we didn't vote for that. You bloody well change your mind and we'll vote you out, son. Because to be honest with you, the members of parliament we have, on the whole, are a pretty crap lot of people. They have nobody vision or anything. And most of them don't understand business anyway. So, I certainly would vote UKIP regardless, because I'm damned if I'm going to support the Conservative Party the next election. Well, why would you vote for traitors? Theresa May said we'll be out of the common market, out of the single market, out of the ECJ. She said all that in her manifesto, as did Labour say that in their manifesto. So both Labour and Conservative had lied to the public in Britain. And that's unconscionable in my view, because you vote for a party on the basis of their manifesto, and they both lied to us. Theresa May is a liar, and she's a doomsdayer. She hasn't got the guts to stand up to the EU. And it's just terrible. As I say, she is a genuine traitor, and I think in history she'll go down as the worst Prime Minister ever for this country, ever. At least Nigel Farage has been honest with us. And that's where I think more people are starting to look at UKIP, because the next election, I don't know, I can't really see. The only thing that's scaring people is Jeremy Corbyn himself. He's an anti-Semitic. I mean, he hates the Jews, let's be honest. That's all over the press at the moment. And he's done nothing really to sort that out. And he wants to go so left-wing. And every country that's gone so left-wing as he wants to go has been a disaster in the world. Look at Venezuela, for example. I mean, that's Corbyn's blueprint, you might say. So that's the only problem we've got, is that, you know, I mean, if Labour were more honest and committed to their manifesto, I would say Labour would definitely be the next political force in the UK, and they'll have the next Prime Minister. But Corbyn is crooked. I mean, he's a con artist and a cheat and a horrible person. He really is. He's no idea about how to run a country. But, you know, people have got to the point where they're saying, well, who can we trust? And you can't trust any of these parties, none of them. The Lib Dems are useless, pathetic. They go totally against having that referendum. And can I say that when we had the referendum, more people voted in that referendum than have ever voted in any election at any time in our history. It was by far the largest vote we've ever had in this country. And we voted 52 to 48 to leave. And that was despite huge fear-mongering. Huge fear-mongering by the Bank of England itself, by the Treasury, by world leaders. Everyone said it'd be a disaster. And we basically, the British people, put two fingers up and said, "Ha, up you, mate, we want out." And as I say, the subsequent general election, which frankly May was disastrous in, I mean, I've never seen anyone fight such a disastrous campaign in my entire life. She was 20% ahead of the polls at one time and ended up actually losing seats. How pathetic is that? Absolutely pathetic. So that's why more and more people are looking to UKIP as a protest vote, really, to say we want out, and so we'll support UKIP if the Conservatives can't be trusted on Brexit. The only thing that might happen is because I think the Chequers deal is dead. It really is. I mean, if you do the Chequers deal, it means we can't do free trade deals with the rest of the world. And CanUZ, that's Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the United Kingdom, you know, that makes up CanUZ. And frankly, the Tory party in Canada has just voted to support the CanUZ free trade deal and free movement deal, because all of us are run by are under our Queen Elizabeth, part of the Commonwealth, but we're so similar in our laws and our Parliament, our free trade outlooks, that we could easily have free movement, because many Australians spend time in London, but they go back home. And likewise, a lot of people in Canada and everywhere else go to Australia, New Zealand, Canada. I mean, we travel between our countries all the time, so I think we should remove all visa barriers, have completely free movement, because we're all so similar that, you know, we should be working closely together. So, UKIP, I suppose, is really the place where Brexiteers would naturally go, because obviously Theresa May being a traitor to this country, she doesn't deserve our support. And I think we should back UKIP, especially with any by-elections coming up or anything like that. When it comes to the actual election, that's got to be a bit more problematic, because, as I say, the trouble is, if you have a big vote for UKIP, it could dilute the Conservative Party and allow Labour to get in. That's got to be a political calculation that you make at the time. But I think we need to send a warning across our bows that, you know, we've enough of you giving in to the EU and wanting to remain. And so up you, we're going to vote for UKIP and scare the living hell out of her. As I say, she is a genuine traitor to this country. No confidence in this country at all. As, in fact, as many of these Remainers. They have no idea about how powerful Britain is in the world. I mean, you could see with that Russian poisoning issue that Russia had no idea that Britain still had a large sway in the world. And look at the hundreds of Russian diplomats were kicked out of tens of countries around the world because they stuck with Britain on that. So I think Russia got a big wake-up call. And it just goes to show that in soft power, Britain is extremely powerful. And we are one of the world's leaders in finance sector, if not the leader in finance at the moment. Our service sector is huge, and it's where most of the major growth is coming from. Manufacturing is not actually that strong in the UK, but it is getting stronger since we voted to leave the EU. And with people like Dyson around, frankly, I think our manufacturing industries could improve dramatically. So, UKIP are honest in saying they want out of the EU, completely out of the EU, to be an independent country again in the world and trade with the world. And as I say, 90% of all future growth in the world is going to come from outside of Europe. So Europe's going to become less and less significant. And I think if you look at Donald Trump, the way he's working, because remember, Donald Trump's a businessman. He's not a politician, although I suppose you could call him a politician now, but he's got long years in business. And in business, you do anything to win. And that's what he's doing. He's messed up the world trade, but on the basis that his country, America, is being unfairly hit with free trade, basically. I mean, the European Union, the USA is their number one place of doing business, and Germany in particular has done very well out of it because they've got a very weak euro currency, and that gives them an advantage in exports. And basically all Donald Trump is trying to do is rectify some of that damage, and he's certainly playing a hard line, but in the end he's a practical guy, you know. And as I say, he already has said he wants to do a great free trade deal with Britain, but he also said that if you remained in the EU like the Chequers Agreement, he said we won't be able to do a deal with you, so, you know, you choose. As the Can said, UK countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all want to do great free trade deals with us, as do many other countries of the world who already said they want to do a good free trade deal with us. I mean, frankly, I don't understand the pessimism of the Remainers. I'm wondering about the educational understanding of these Remainers. They seem to be really stupid people, most of them. I mean, Kenneth Clarke, he's the turncoat of the Conservative Party. He wants to remain, but he's an old-timer. He's dead. I mean, mentally, he's dead. He has no idea about what Britain can do if we target the world. So, you know, that's why I say I think UKIP deserves our support, because they've been honest. It's the one party that said we need to leave the EU and trade with the world. And that's what Nigel Farage has been going on about. Unfortunately, his part, once since we won the referendum, his party's really been almost wiped out, basically. But it's come back quite strongly just recently because of the Chequers Agreement, because most people realise that's just a total fudge. And I think that's allowed the people to find that Theresa May is a traitor to this country. And I say that with all seriousness. She is a genuine traitor to Britain. She has no faith in the British at all. And our poor fishermen, she's going to sink them down the water if she can get away with it and get a little extra deal from the EU. She's a horrible traitor and should go. She won't go, because that's the trouble with the Conservative Party. They don't have another clear contender. And that's why I think we need to go to UKIP, to actually wake everyone up and say, well, if you can't do it, we'll vote UKIP in. But UKIP need to get better organised if they've got any chance of winning the next elections. And that's, remember, it's a 5-year thing. So, I don't know. I mean, frankly, I would have voted UKIP, certainly, because at the end of the day, I believe in Britain. and I believe in united Britain. That means Scotland as well. I think Scotland would be foolish to go to independence, especially now. I think it's very, very clear that all of Scotland's business is really with England and not with the EU at all. And you've got to watch, because people will say things that are actually honest but are really not. It's like I wrote to Nicola Sturgeon to say how important is the EU to our business in Scotland. And she wrote back and said the EU is by far Scotland's largest market. But then we found out that in fact 2/3 of all exports from Scotland go to England alone. But because England's in the EU, she was perfectly right to say the EU is Scotland's largest market. But that market included England, where 2/3 of our export go to. So it shows that the rest of the EU, frankly, is, I mean, it's maybe what, 10% maybe, or 14%, something like that of Scottish business. So, you know, I mean, it's minute really at the end of the day. I mean, America is our next largest market. And yet Nicola Sturgeon, because she's a bit stupid as well, feels she can castigate Donald Trump anytime she wants. But we need America for our exports. But she can't see that, and she just feels that because she hates the guy, she's got the right to say she hates him. She has no idea about how that affects Scottish business. It's just pure stupidity on her part. And so, you know, it's all of these reasons that I say that UKIP was a breath of fresh air. And UKIP actually got a member of an MSP into the Scottish Parliament. So that goes to show you that people are listening. But Nigel Farage is certainly the big man in UKIP, and I say, unfortunately, a lot of other so-called leaders that came in after him have been pretty hopeless. So I think UKIP needs a real shot in the arm as far as new people joining their organisation. So in essence, UKIP has been calling, even before the referendum, for Britain to come out of the EU and be an independent trading country in the world. That's what UKIP stood for. That's where they got a lot of votes. But as I say, unfortunately, after the referendum was won, Nigel Farage thought he'd done the deal. And of course it did look like it, because both Labour and Conservative both said in their manifestos we'd be completely out of the EU. They both lied to us. And I think that's a big indictment. And I think maybe that's where UKIP could come back, because we're saying, well, Labour didn't do what they said, Conservative didn't do what they said. Let's give UKIP a chance. Let's all vote UKIP, whether we're Labour, Conservative, whatever. And so, you know, that's my take on UKIP. At least they've been honest with us. But unfortunately, some of the people working for them, not very good. So, I hope I've maybe explained a little bit of the background towards UKIP. And if that's helped at all, great. Maybe leave me a comment if you agree or disagree or whatever. But that's my take anyway at the moment. Thanks for listening.